We've just had the UK budget for 2024, which was actually pretty interesting and has brought with it some big news, in particular a new ISA, which is huge. I mean, once you've gotten past all of this...
If we want that growth...
What? The Chancellor has hardly said anything.
I mean, honestly, what a joke the whole thing is. But I've sat through it and sifted through what I think are the most important things that you need to know. So let's talk about them and how they will affect your investments going forward. If you find this useful, do me a favour and press that like and subscribe, as it's the best metric to let me know which type of content to make more of. The main theme around this budget is definitely growth. I think what's interesting is at this point we can pretty much guarantee that Labour will be in the next time round. Whichever side you land on, they've taken the brunt from the fallout from COVID and the Ukraine war, which realistically would have hurt either party just as hard. So it seems like the budget was mostly based around, look what we've done, or look what we're doing. The main point seems to be that the Conservatives believe they're the ones that can drive growth in the country going forward. And of course, Labour completely disagree with that. We could tell this is an election year policy, as he's made specific pledges to areas they need the votes from. In a bold claim, he said the UK is on track to become the world's next Silicon Valley. I mean, I'm not quite sure about that. Although he has made changes to try and make the UK one of the most attractive investment zones within Europe. Companies like Nissan, Google and Microsoft have been investing more in the UK and building more data centres, which neither of them disagreed with. He also announced more investments in AI, drones and automation, which is a positive step forward and something that will grow into the future. Now, a huge step, and probably the most shocking that came out of the day, at least for me, was the introduction of a new ISA called the British ISA. I was actually expecting changes and consolidations of existing ISAs, namely changes to the lifetime ISA, as it's so confusing for people. So now we'll be up to having 6 different types of ISA, including the Cash ISA, Stocks and Shares ISA, Innovative Finance ISA, Cash Lifetime ISA, as well as a Stocks and Shares Lifetime ISA, and the 6th one will be the new British ISA. I mean, could you get any more confusing than that? The way this will work is from April 2024, you'll be able to invest a further £5,000 per year into British companies, which will be on top of your existing allowance. So for example, you already have a £20,000 allowance, which can be split across your normal ISAs. Say £4,000 in a lifetime ISA and £16,000 in a Stocks and Shares ISA. But now, just to confuse things even more, you would get an additional £5,000 on top of the $20,000, taking you up to £25,000 per year that you can put into an ISA. Now, I have to admit, this sounds good. I mean, in particular, good for UK business. But I think it brings a lot of problems. First is, which providers will actually offer this service? The lifetime ISA is already a lot of hassle, and a lot of providers don't want to deal with it because of how much paperwork it is and how much they can actually make out of it. With the British ISA only being £5,000, I can imagine it's not actually going to inspire a lot of companies to adopt it as a service, especially the lower cost ones. For example, if you take someone like InvestEngine, if they have to adapt their platform to specific UK ETFs to be held just within there, are they going to want to do it on just £5,000? Maybe, or maybe it will be too much work for the reward involved. In my opinion, what this is going to cause is a problem because people are going to have to use the more expensive providers that charge you a lot more to trade. So I feel like it's going to lean itself more to the expensive providers and not towards the low-cost ones, which of course is not good for the customer. It would have made more sense to increase this to allow people who have the spare money to put it into the UK. Perhaps if this was much higher, it would see more adoption. The second problem is the vast majority of people in the UK can't afford to fill a £20,000 ISA every year. So the extra £5,000 is only going to be something people in a really strong position can afford to actually fill. For me, it would have made much more sense to incentivise people to invest in this, so there was a benefit of picking the ISA over a standard one. Perhaps some kind of added bonus you get for investing into it, similar to what we've seen in the lifetime ISA. If we couple that into the fact the UK typically performs much worse than the US and the developed world, in fact a lot of funds actively choose to exclude the UK, you have to wonder who's actually going to want to put money into this. Perhaps it could be a good thing for dividend investors in particular, but for your average investor, I'm not too sure. While it may seem like a good idea, we have to think about the allowance across the board. If you invest for a long enough period of time and plan to retire either on or after the private pension age, the compound interest you'll get from a pension or a SIP will outweigh the returns from your ISA. In fact, you should prioritise your pension before an ISA in most cases. So what this means is that if a pension is priority number one for somebody, and then the ISA to build up a tax-free balance to aim to retire before that, you've then got to put into the picture a typical year. 32,000 you can put into a pension, £20,000 you can put into an ISA, and now you have an additional £5,000 you can put into a British ISA. So this could only be a good option for people who've got maybe 57,000 to invest. If that ISA forces you to invest in British stocks, I don't see why it would ever be worth putting money in here before the other 52,000 limit you have, which you can invest internationally and get better returns. Unless you have an additional £5,000 on top of that you want to grow, or you're in the fortunate position to have a pension sorted for retirement and you're just looking to build up an ISA as much as possible. The other issue would be what you can actually buy in there, which could be interesting. You would either essentially have to go for a FTSE fund. I'm guessing they would allow the FTSE 100 in there, although a lot of their business is done overseas, and most people would opt for this. In theory, it would make more sense to allow specific investment in UK-based businesses which got the majority of their income from the UK and spent their money in the UK, as well as employing a lot of people within our country. Picking these would be tricky, but it would make for some interesting content for sure, as I do think there's some valuable UK-based companies and options for this ISA. My worry would be, however, that this ISA could actually have a detrimental effect on investing. We already see way too many people choosing the wrong type of investment that doesn't get them the returns they wanted, and while this might encourage growth in the UK, we only have to compare what you would have gotten from the FTSE 250 over the past 5 years to the developed world. And I don't know about you, but I would much rather a 60% return than a 2% return. And it might even encourage people who have never invested before to just start investing in the UK and not realise there's any other options. I get that they need to incentivise investment in the UK, but I don't think this is good enough. I feel like this is going to push unknowing investors into making poor investment choices. They've already pushed for changes to pension funds, asking them to be more transparent in their investment percentages into the UK. These changes are yet to be finalised, but it could mean that pension funds will be putting more money into UK businesses and having less choice as to where the money is invested. This could mean they have less choice as to where they invest their funds, or be forced to invest more into the UK and receive less growth on pensions, which, let's face it, could be completely out of your control. They've said there'll be more focus on fund performance and making sure funds perform well, which could be a positive. We've already seen a big change in transparency on fees, which caused St James's Place, who are known for their shocking fees, to completely revamp their structure, in which a lot of people received compensation. My worry is, will this likely have more of a negative impact than a positive one? Good for the UK, I think, as an economy, but not convinced it's a good move for investors. Growth in the UK has really not been fantastic, while the boasting statistic is the highest growth in the G7 countries. When you drill down and look at the numbers and look at it per capita, which is effectively a better measure of how growth really affects people in the UK, it's gone nowhere in the last 2 years, and it's actually predicted to be 0.75% lower in 2028, than it was last year, which is not the direction it's claimed to be going in. On the one hand, I think incentivised investment zones, especially in poor areas, is very good. I'm not convinced that growth in the UK should be created by trying to force us as investors, knowingly or more likely unknowingly, to invest in the UK. There was a couple of other big changes. One was a reduction in national insurance by 2%. This, despite what people are saying, is good because we'll pay less tax than what we are now. It is being spun very negatively because although this is a 4% cut in national insurance, because they haven't raised the thresholds, people are still effectively paying more tax, which is not good. What I'd be interested to see is if you work overseas, does this mean the stamp duty you pay will be cheaper in the UK? Meaning you can still work remote and pay cheaper national insurance and not pay tax here. An increasing theme I'm seeing is a lot of people are just making a ton of money and then leaving for Dubai, especially within the UK. I personally see this as one of the biggest challenges we face right now. The message should not be get successful and leave. There was also finally an increase to the threshold that you have to start paying VAT at, now up to £90,000 from £85,000. Many were hoping this would go to £100,000 as it hasn't been increased for 7 years. As you can imagine, inflation has been going crazy in that time, so it doesn't really make up for the freezes that have been in place. This, on top of not raising income tax, are hidden taxes we have to pay but are never highlighted. And this is one of the most frustrating things about the budget. It's not what they're saying, which they constantly bicker over and try and dig at one another. It's what aren't they saying, and what does this really mean? There was a couple of clearer and more notable positive changes though. A small change to investing is something called the British Saving Bond, which will give people a fixed return for 3-year periods. This could be interesting depending on what it pays. I will report more on that one when it launches. But they're also finally, which is a really good change, putting in place plans to fix the stupid child benefit law, which means you could have 2 people living in the same house, currently earning £49,000 each, with a total household income of £98,000 getting child benefits. And then you've got a second household with one person earning 50k and another earning 10k, with a total income of 60,000, who wouldn't get it, which has been highly criticised. And of course, that is a more realistic picture of a normal household in the UK, especially if you've got kids. This is aiming to be changed by 2026, but in the meantime, they'll be increasing the 50k threshold to 60k, which should affect 170,000 families under 60k. And nearly 500,000 will save 1,300 over that threshold. Overall, I think the budget has been interesting to say the least. I'm really interested to see whether this will help stimulate some much needed growth in the UK, but I have to admit, at present I can't see me rushing to open a British ISA and move my investments from overseas to here. They definitely need to give some more incentive to people to actually do this. Let me know if you'll be opening one in the comments down below. What I believe is actually more scary is what's to come when Labour gets in. I don't particularly like either party or the entire system, if I'm being honest. I think we need a proper change. But I dread to think what taxes are going to be increased, and perhaps even more tax on investments the next time round. As always, let me know your thoughts, and I hope this was helpful. Thanks.